So, welcome to day one of Learn AR Weekend. We're going to try to cover today the basics of Unity, and we're going to try to get everyone set up with ARKit, ARCore, and Vuforia. First, we're just going to kind of just cover just some basics of the program, and yeah, you can go ahead and open up your Unity. And you can feel free to minimize OBS. Um, so by the end of this class, you should have like my screen recording and your own screen recording, and that'll be plenty of screen recordings to remember everything that's done here. There's no note taking required or any of that. Of course, if you want to, you can, but it's typically a little hard to take notes on this kind of stuff, and then you have to go through it all, and just much better to watch a video. It's gonna be a very long video, but that's okay. So once you open Unity, you should just kind of see a dialog with some projects open or whatever. Maybe sometimes it'll be on this Learn. So what you can do is just click New right here, and we're going to create a new project. Yep. And then we're going to call it Learn AR Weekend Day 1. So, sorry about that. I gotta sign into my account. All right. Set Learn AR Weekend Day 1. Cool. Create project. All right, so depending on your layout or stuff, it's always kind of like a little bit different. So just to set it up on the baseline, you're gonna in the top right corner here where it says layout, you can click there and then just select default, and then it's gonna reset the Unity layout to the default. So just go ahead and do that. So the top right here, click where it says layout or whatever, maybe it says something else, and just click default, and then we'll bring it to our default skin. Now with Unity, the whole program is like extensible, so you could change any of these parts, you resize them and all that stuff. So that's kind of what's part of that layout. So every programmer, creative individual sets up their Unity in the way that they kind of want to, and you can actually save that as a layout over here. You can save it. But we're just going to start from the default, and you'll see we'll change it, but only very slightly, and it's kind of like my recommended way of having it set up. But basically, so when you open Unity, the most kind of like noticeable part is always like this middle part, and this is called the 3D view. So this is the scene view currently that we're in. You can see here they have like these little tabs. You have scene, game, and like asset store. So right now we're just going to kind of work in scene. Now this would be a good time, like if you're using a touchpad, to actually go into your input settings. I think it's like input. It's like touchpad or something. Trackpad, yeah. You go into trackpad settings, and you use the secondary click. You should set it to click in bottom right corner, so that you're not doing like the double kind of like finger touch for the right click, because right click is really important in Unity for kind of navigating around. If you have a mouse, you don't have to worry about that. You're just gonna navigate around with the mouse. So once you have that set up, you'll see that if you hold right click in the scene view, your cursor will change to this little eye, basically letting you know that this is kind of now you're in almost like this first person view mode. So when you hold right click and you look around, you're actually like kind of looking around in 3D space. So another thing that you can do while you have this right click pressed, you'll notice nothing happens when you're not at the right click pressed. So when you hold the right click, you can actually move forward by holding W. And you'll see that like it kind of, see that, and it, to go backwards is S. So if you've ever played any first-person games or PC games, it's the primary kind of like almost like the arrow keys, but it's like W, A, S, D. So A is to strafe left, D is to strafe right, W is forward, S is backward. So it's kind of like, kind of hold your fingers like this, like your middle finger on the W, your ring finger on the A, and your index finger on the D, and then you kind of use your middle finger for the W and S. And then you see that like, I just want you to kind of practice holding right click, and now to kind of go around this camera, like what I'm doing is like I'm kind of strafing left a little bit, then I'm turning right, strafing left, turning right, strafing left, turning right, and you'll see that you kind of can completely go around like a 3D object. So I've seen this even with like intermediate users of Unity. They still have a little bit of trouble kind of navigating around their scene and stuff. So I think this is like a best practice to just kind of like, just try to go around an object like so. So this camera now that we're kind of going around is a pretty important piece in Unity. So a camera is basically what your application is going to see through when it's actually exported or when it's playing. So the scene view is just like the editor view, where like you can move stuff around and edit stuff, whereas the camera in its final position is what like actually will be viewed in the game, and we'll see what this means in a second. So the first thing that we're gonna kind of go ahead and do is, so to select an object, you can click on it, like if you click on the camera, and you'll notice that on the right side here, this is called the inspector. So when you have something selected, the inspector actually gives you more details about the object that you currently have selected. So Unity kind of works in this fashion. Like everything that you kind of select, you see if you click this light, you can see that the inspector is now revealing the light component. If you click the camera, you can see that there's like some details about the camera, like the field of view and etc. If you click the light, you can see that you can change the color of the light, and some other functions that we're going to get into in a little bit. The other thing that you can do in Unity is not only can you just select in the scene view, you can also select on this left side here, which is called the hierarchy. So you can see in the hierarchy, we currently just have a main camera and a directional light. So it's the equivalent, if you click it in main camera here, is the same as if you click it in the 3D view. So it's interchangeable. If you click it here, it gets highlighted in the hierarchy. If you click it in the hierarchy, it gets highlighted in the 3D view. So the hierarchy is a super useful place for when your project becomes a little more complex and you have like 100 objects in your scene at the same time. You might not always be able to find it in the 3D view easily. You can always find it in a hierarchy. And if you double click an object here in the hierarchy, it just centers on it right away, like that. So it's just like a quick way to get to a certain object. Now, I want to kind of explain a little bit this inspector here on the right. So everything in Unity is what's called component based. So you have objects, and then objects have components. Now, every object in Unity, every game object that is, has something called a transform. And you can see it here on the right. Like, even though the light has a light component, it also has a transform component. The main camera has a camera component and a transform component. So everything has what's called a transform. Now the transform is basically the object's positional property. So it's X, Y, and Z. It's also its rotational property. It's the rotation in the X, Y, and Z. And it's its scale, also in X, Y, and Z coordinate space. So in Unity, usually Y is up, and Z is kind of like forward, and X is to the right. Now you don't have to remember that right now, but you can always kind of check here in the top right. You can see as you're rotating, you can see how that those axes are kind of showing you which way it's facing. So, for example, if we wanted to take this light, So if you click the directional light, and if you can't find it, you can just double click it here in hierarchy. But if you just click the directional light, the first thing you'll notice is that these kind of arrows appear as well, kind of around it. So you can use these arrows and you can pull on them to move this light in 3D space. Now, careful not to grab by the middle. If you grab by the middle, you're kind of moving in more than one axis at the same time. It's important to grab by the individual arrow so you have like precise control over the direction that you're going in. It's very hard to control the direction if you just kind of grab by the middle. You're kind of going in multiple places. Another way of actually moving it is you can modify the position just numerically. So here on the right side in the inspector, try to notice like when I pull this X, notice here, right here where I have this X highlighted, see how the X value is changing as I'm moving it in the X or the Y or whatever. Right here in the inspector, you see that? So just pay attention to this number, and then when I move it, you see how it's going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and if I go backwards, it's going all the way to 0, and then it goes into -1, -2, and etc. So yeah, basically just this kind of transform component here on the right. You can see that the numbers are changing as you're kind of moving it. So in Unity Space, if you just click over here on the inspector of the light in the transform, if you just make the X 0, the Y 0, and the Z 0, you'll notice that it'll kind of move it to the middle of the scene. So the middle of the Unity scene is like 0, 0, 0, basically. If you go into -X, you can go pretty much infinity in negative and also infinity in positive. So that's kind of like how we had in high school, the graph X and Y, but we also have a third dimension now because we're working in 3D. So the same thing can be done with the main camera, but we won't really play with that yet. What I actually want to go ahead and do first is add our first 3D object to the scene. So Unity comes preloaded with a bunch of just kind of like basic objects, like primitives, just kind of, test around with and use it for various purposes. So in order to access that list of just kind of game objects, you can actually select game object up here in the menu bar. And you're going to see a bunch of different things, 3D objects, 2D effects, lights, audio, etc. What we're looking for is a 3D object, and we're going to add a plane. So if you just click plane, you'll see that a plane gets created in your scene. So we can do the same thing with this plane. We can kind of move it around, etc. But I actually want to center this plane in the Unity scene, and you know how to do that? Remember what we said? You click the plane, you go into its inspector, the transform, and you make its X, Y, and Z coordinates all 0. And that's how you can like precisely kind of tune the positions of things. So, and if your plane isn't centered, you can kind of try to hold that right click and navigate it kind of around it to get it into view. If it's really kind of out of view and you can't find it, you can always just double click the plane and the camera will just center around it. So we've kind of covered the hierarchy, the scene view, and a little bit of the inspector. We still haven't covered this whole bottom area. Now I'm going to show you what this bottom area is for. You can probably already kind of assume. It's called the project view. So if you just open your web browser and you're going to go to Google and just Google something like grass texture. And then you're going to go into images. So Google Images, something like grass texture. Now we're looking for one that preferably isn't like landscape like this. We'd want one that's square because we can kind of assume that since it's a grass texture image, that's probably going to be seamless. And seamless means that like the left and right side of the images, they have no seam. So when you put them right next to each other, it almost looks like it's just kind of like a tiled image. So usually, the textures will properly seamed textures will be square like this. It's not a requirement. You can put a regular texture, but it won't look right, and you know we can show that later why it won't. So like in here, I think maybe like this one should be fine, and then I'm gonna just click View Image, and it'll give me the image like this. And then what you can do is you could right click Save Image As, or you could just drag and drop it to your desktop. I'm gonna just drag and drop it to my desktop, and now that I have my image asset on the desktop, I can actually drag and drop this into Unity. So I'm going to drag it into this bottom area of Unity called the project view. You can see that a little plus icon kind of shows up on your cursor.
You can't drag it from the web browser right into Unity.
Yeah,
it won't transform.
Yeah, it doesn't do it. You have to drag it to like desktop or into a folder. So yeah, if you just drag that grass texture into the project view, you should see it pop up in there in Unity like so. Now, once you have that, to add this grass texture onto our plane is as simple as dragging that asset onto the plane. This is a simple way of doing it. And you just release, and you'll see that that grass texture has been applied to your plane. So let me know when you have that. Good. So just drag it on there, and there it goes. So now kind of like hold right click and approach the plane a little bit, get a little closer. Now our plane is a little small. I mean, this is all relative, but I actually want to make it a little bit bigger. So there's two ways you can do this. You can obviously tweak the scale factor, which is 1 by 1 by 1 right now, or you can use the scale tool, which all the tools are available here in the top left. You have the move tool, the rotate tool, the scale tool, and some of these other ones, you know, like which we don't really use that much, like the rectangle tool and the move, rotate, or scale like tool. I think this is a new one. It does everything together. That's weird. Okay. Yeah, but we want the scale tool in this instance. So if you click the scale tool, you'll notice it looks just like the move tool, but instead of arrows, you get these like little cubes. So what you can do is you can actually drag by the individual sides, and you can see that you're scaling your plane. If you drag by the Z and the X, it'll scale. If you drag by the Y, you won't see anything, and the reason is because a plane, this is an actual like mathematical plane, it has 0 thickness, so it will not like scale in the Y. A cube would, but the plane won't. So now this is obviously like kind of like a rough way of scaling. You can also scale unilaterally, so in every axis at the same time, by just grabbing this middle cube, and you can just kind of scale them all together like that. So that's one way of scaling. It's kind of like the more just manual way. But the way that I want us to scale right now is like a precise scale. I just want to make the plane 5 by 5 by 5. So in the scale here in the transform, you should just change the X, Y, and Z to just 5 by 5 by 5. And then you should kind of see like a bigger plane like this. So now you'll notice that like our grass texture looks a little pixelated because it's kind of like big. Obviously if you get closer, like you would be like in AR or in VR or something, it looks like this. It's very pixelated. Now that also has to do with the texture. It's a little bit of a small detailed texture, but there's a way that we can actually multiply the tiling of this texture to tile it and then to make it look better. So what you do is once you have your plane selected, you'll notice that after we dragged the grass texture, over here on the right, in the bottom part of the inspector, you should see like the name of your texture in like this kind of sphere. So that's the material of the plane that's currently applied. So you can actually expand this view by clicking that little arrow right there, and then you should see just kind of like a few settings in here. and your actual grass texture is here in this slot called the albedo. So the albedo is like basically the main color of the material. There's a few other like slots in here, like normal map, height map, and stuff. We'll go into those in a little bit. But for now, just the albedo is basically the color of this plane. Now, this white color next to the albedo is the color multiplier. So you can actually click that white color and you can change the color multiplier of this plane. So but we can just put it back to white, just so you know that that's a feature. Now, what I want to do here is, so we want to tile this texture. So I want you to look at under these kind of slots, there should be a tiling, and there should be like an X and Y there. It just says 1 by 1. So I want to change that to 5 by 5 because our plane was a scale of 5 by 5, and that should kind of be enough. Now that you can make that 10 by 10 or something, and you can see the result is that we're actually multiplying the texture, we're tiling it, and now when you look at it closer, it looks better. It looks better on the eye. It's not so pixelated anymore. So now, I guess this would be a good time to kind of show you an example. That you don't have to do this. I'll probably just delete it right after. But say like you chose one of these images that wasn't square, like this one. Like you can totally tell this is not a texture. This is kind of like a photo of just grass, right? So if we just use this instead of that, for example, and I pull that in here, and I put that material on here, and if I did the same exact thing, like tile it, like 5 by 5 or something like that, you can see that it will look like this. See? But that's kind of how the tiles work. You can kind of, it's 5 by 15, sorry, 5 by 5. See, it kind of looks like this. So there's seams. Now there's a quick way to do this in Photoshop to fix seams, but that's totally up to you. Like when you're graphic designing, it's the biggest deal is to just make sure that like the edges are the same on the left side, right side, top side, and bottom side. But yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and put this one back on. So I'm gonna delete this one actually. Now you'll also notice that after dragging that grass plane on there, a folder called materials gets created. Now this is an automatic function, and I just typically do this with the grass texture thing just to show how easy it is. You drag it onto the desktop, you drag it into Unity, you drag it onto your plane. It doesn't get any simpler than that. But what that process actually does is it automatically creates something called a material, which kind of lives in this material folder that just kind of gets created right there. I don't need this other material anymore because I just use that as an example. But basically, a texture is just a picture, whereas a material is the actual collection of like textures and its properties. Like, is it metallic, smoothness, etc. Like if you make something fully metallic and smooth, it kind of gets like this effect. And then it has other features in there like the tiling. So a texture is just one like data point. It's basically just the image, whereas the material contains like the texture and its properties, like how it's used. How many times it's tiled, is it metallic, is it smooth, is it multiplied by a certain color, and etc. So
when you select it on the canvas, you're looking at its material.
Yep. So usually a 3D object, you'll kind of want to have a material on it. Otherwise, it'll just kind of look white or unmaterialed. So I want to kind of explain a little bit more this material stuff. So what I actually want to do now is create a new game object. So I'm going to click Game Object, 3D Object, and I'm going to make a sphere this time. Now, your sphere might not show up, right? But you can see it's here on the left in the hierarchy. It exists. The reason is because it's probably got made under your plane. Sometimes these objects get made in kind of like randomized places. what you can do quickly is obviously you could just pull it by the arrow like this and pull it out of your ground like I just did. Or you could just put the sphere manually by changing its position to 0, 0, 0. And then we can just kind of bring it to middle there. Again, if you just can't find it, you can always just double click it and it'll kind of center on it. So you'll see that it's like a half sphere right now because half of it is in the ground. So you can actually pull it out a little bit, just like that. Now, the reason why, when you put it 0, 0, 0 and it's in the ground, it's because the middle point of the sphere is in the middle of the sphere. So when it says 0, 0, 0, it's like you'll only see from the middle point of the sphere and above because the plane is cutting through the middle of the world, basically. So that's why we want to kind of raise it up just a little bit. Now, the exact amount to have it kind of above the plane should be 0.5 because a sphere, the radius of the sphere in Unity is like 0.5. And I think a cube is like, the diameter of the sphere and like the length of a cube is 1. So the radius is like 0.5. So now that we kind of have our sphere and we kind of have it on this grass plane, I want to actually kind of go ahead and find another material for the sphere. Now, you can get creative with this. You can kind of make it anything you want. I usually like to do like a marble texture, but you can go ahead and do, a brick texture. You can do a rock texture. You can kind of go crazy with it. You could do a fire texture. Whatever you kind of think would look cool. But I'm gonna just go with marble texture, just nice and boring. I'll pick like a nice marble texture. Now these don't need to be squared. It's okay. We probably won't tile it. That's why it doesn't need to be squared. As long as it's like if you don't find a square one and it's not tiled, as long as it's just like a little bit higher res, it's fine. But even if it's not, it's not a big deal. The sphere is going to be kind of small. So I'll get like a marble texture like this. So this kind of has a watermark on it, or whatever. It doesn't matter. Just an example. And I'll do the same thing. I'll just kind of drag it onto the desktop. And also make sure if you're in the materials folder here, you can always navigate in the project view just by clicking this kind of left side here. It's almost just like a file explorer. You can just kind of click assets. That's your top level kind of view. Just to keep things not confusing, let's work in this assets folder up here, and we'll work with the materials folder later. So I'm going to pull my texture in here right next to the grass texture. Here it is. And now we could just pull it onto the sphere and it automatically creates a material for us. But I actually just want to show you how to manually create a material because you're probably going to need to do this at some point. So in order to create an asset like a material, you right click here in the project view. So you just right click and you go create. And then it'll be a bunch of stuff in there. You kind of want material, which is like in the top middle part of it. So just right click in the project view, create, and then material. And then name your material something like marble or whatever yours is, rock or fire or whatever it is you went with. Now the material, you can see it starts white. It just kind of doesn't have anything on it currently. So to add something to it, there's two ways you can do it. You could drag into this albedo slot your texture, or you can click that little circle icon right next to it, and it'll actually pull up the file browser, and you can kind of select the material you want. There seems to be a checker material on here as well. But I'm just gonna go with this, marble material that I kind of got. So now that you kind of set up your material slightly, and you just have this texture on it, you can actually now take that material marble and drag it onto your sphere. So see if I'm hovering over the grass texture, see, but I want to hover over the sphere and let go. And now I got marble material. Now see, my texture has a little bit of seam here, but it's no big deal. We're not, this is just kind of an example. So just make sure this is all still recording. Yes, it is. Good. So now what we want to do is I want to kind of show you, this material stuff and how you can kind of make it look a little bit cooler. So one of the cool features in Unity is you can actually create something what's called a normal map from a regular texture. As now a normal map is kind of like a bump map, so we want to kind of make our sphere a little bumpy. We want to kind of add some more definition to it. So this is just like a quick kind of hack way that I do it. You can actually right click on your texture and click reveal in Finder. And then once you're in there, you should kind of see the folder. Now, in Unity, everything that you do in your project actually lives in a folder somewhere. Usually, like it's in your documents. Now, every file that's in this folder, if you change it or if you do something to it, you go back to Unity, it will also change in Unity. So it's one-to-one. Like Unity project isn't something that just lives somewhere weird. It's literally like a folder. And it's all your assets live in this folder called assets. Everything outside of that assets folder is just Unity specific stuff that you don't really ever change. But it's the assets folder that we're looking at. Now that photo or that texture for me is marble, for you could be something else. What I want you to do is I want you to duplicate it, just in Finder. Just make a nice duplicate of it. And then if you go back into Unity, you'll see that the texture has been duplicated in there. The reason I do it in Finder is because you can't like duplicate in Unity in the project. Yeah, it's just like it's one-to-one with the Finder, so stuff like that they don't really need to do, because you could just do it yourself, like in Finder. So now that it's duplicated, I actually want to take the duplicated texture, the second one, and now you'll notice that not only does a 3D object or something in here have an inspector, the texture itself also has an inspector. So when you click it here on the right, you'll see some texture properties, like max size and stuff like that, but we don't really need to tweak that yet. What I want to look for specifically is here it says texture type. It says default right now. I want you to select normal map instead. So texture type normal map. And I want you to also check this little checkbox that says create from grayscale. And then you should see like a little bar that says bumpiness. Now, you can download just normal maps off the internet, and I'll show you how they kind of work. Or you can create your own normal maps in a 3D program. What we're doing here is we're actually creating a normal map from the grayscale of this image. So mine's already kind of black and white. But if yours is like a fire texture or rock texture or something like that, what it's going to do, it's going to make it black and white, and then it's going to take the black and white values and use that as the bumpiness. So I believe that it's like the black is like the depth, and like the white is like the peaks or something like that, or it's the other way around. But so what we want to do is here, the create from grayscale, I want to make that bumpiness really low. Like I want to actually type in like something like 0.01, something like that. So very small, because we want a very subtle effect. So something like that, create from grayscale, bumpiness 0.01. And then once you have that, you can click apply. And now you'll notice that your textures turn kind of this purplish color. So if you kind of expand it here, you can now see what that kind of looks like. So normal maps have this specific type of color space where it uses this kind of green, purple like color scheme to kind of estimate what's front, what's back, what's side. If you don't know what that means, it's okay. But if you kind of really zoom it in here, you can see that every crack, what was in the original image, you can see the original image, and you can see the normal map. you can see that like each line here kind of has, see here there's like a little blue and then there's also a red, and that kind of simulates this kind of effect. Like, so the blue is everything that's kind of on this side and the red is everything that's kind of on that side, and it kind of creates a bump, basically like a simulated bump. Again, it's not that important like how the normal maps work, but I just like to explain it kind of anyway. But you'll see the effect visually. So now that we have our normal map, now you can click your material marble or whatever you called it. And here in normal map, you can obviously just drag it in there too. But I'm just going to click here where it says normal map. And I'm going to find my normal map. So it's this one. And there it is. So now, I don't know if you can tell the difference, but my sphere looks kind of bumpy. Now if you really want to kind of tell the difference, you can change this value right here where it says 1 right next to normal map. It's the amount of how much the normal map is actually being used. So if you make it 0, look at that. So that's the difference. See that? And you can even make it more pronounced by making it 3, 4, or 5 or something, but you can see that kind of looks ridiculous if you make it too much. So the beauty of the normal map is once you kind of have something like this, you see that nice kind of line there. If you start playing with the metallic and the smoothness, now you can really see the effect of this. You see that actually kind of, you can make it look like more like a metal ball such. The other thing too is the light. So if I rotate the light by kind of clicking the rotate tool, you can see that the light actually affects the bumps. You see that? Mm-hmm.
There's no need to always save, right?
So, yes, there is actually. That is not a stupid question at all. So yeah, we should save at this point. So you can just do Command S, or you can go up here in File and then Save Scene. And it's gonna, bring up this dialog. You want to name your scene, so you don't want to go into another folder. Your scene needs to be saved in the assets folder. So you don't want to like save it on your desktop or something like that. So just save it as just test, something like that. And click save, and now you should see test shows up here. And that's the whole arrangement of the scene that we have right now. So I think I've kind of explained a little bit, this kind of material stuff. Now you can see what the difference between a texture and a material is. See, like a material can have multiple textures in it that kind of define what is the material. It's its bumpiness, it's its color, it's its shininess, and etc. So these are very important for kind of achieving certain effects in AR and in VR. If you want to make something look shiny or like a water or polished or rough, these are kind of the settings that you would tweak. So now that's all fine and good, but how does this translate, to an app or to something that's actually going to play back? Because this is just kind of the editor right now. Well, if you just kind of go ahead and press play right now, and you can see play right up here in Unity, you should probably get something weird looking or just something like this. Just a static scene, just like that. So that's actually where the camera is viewing from. Now I'm going to explain how this works, right? But the first thing that we want to do is unpress play, so it's not pause. If you press pause, you didn't actually stop the playing, you just paused it. To actually stop the scene from simulating, you unpress play. So unpress play, and now what we're going to do is, you notice how if you click the game tab here, so you have scene and you have game. You can see that the game tab was what we were just seeing earlier. So when you press play, it automatically switches to the game tab, which is like what you're kind of seeing in the game. Now what I want to do is I want to kind of have both visible at the same time. So what you can actually do is this game tab, you can drag it out of here and you can actually pull it down here into the side part of the project. This is kind of where I would recommend you have it, right here, and kind of let it go. And now, you can maybe scale it a little bit, and now you can kind of see both at the same time. So all of Unity is like this. You can pull any of these parts and just kind of arrange your whole program in any way that you want. This is the recommended arrangement that I would recommend because it kind of gives you, your project view doesn't need to be that long. But at the same time, now you're also seeing like the game preview, and you can also work with your scene and your hierarchy and your inspector, and everything's kind of nice and in view. What I want to do now is I actually want to double click on the main camera and to center it. And if I just kind of go a little bit closer to it, if I start moving this camera by going into the move tool, a shortcut to change to the move tool is just W, just so you know. And if I start moving this camera, you can see how the game view is moving. So the camera is what's really rendering your scene. And you can do interesting things like change the field of view of the camera, and you can see that you're kind of, it's almost like a camera lens. You can kind of tweak it. But 60 is fine for the field of view for now. Yeah, there's some other cool features there. So now what I kind of want to do is I want to just take this camera and just bring it a little bit closer to my sphere. So this was just the basic tutorial for just kind of moving stuff around, some of this material, kind of just getting you comfortable with how you move stuff, how you scale stuff, rotation and stuff. I think I didn't cover rotation. So if you just click on the camera, let's just try some rotations. So click on the camera, you switch to the rotation tool, which is up here in the top left. And now you'll see the rotation gizmo looks interesting. It's kind of like, it looks something like this. You see, just like it has these thin lines that are color coded based on the X, Y, and Z. So obviously you can just grab by the whole sphere and rotate your camera, but you'll get that. So you don't really want to do that. It's the same as moving. You don't want to move by the middle because you don't have control over the direction. Now at any point you can undo in Unity just by doing Command Z to just undo anything that you do in Unity. So the way you actually want to rotate, so it's up here in the top left.
Got it.
Yep. So now to actually rotate properly, you want to highlight these specific lines. Now you can tell you're doing it right. If the whole thing is selected, you kind of see that the whole sphere darkens a little bit. But what you actually want to do is you want to select these individual lines. So if I want to move the camera like up and down like this, I'm going to select this red line and pull by that. And now you can see that I'm kind of panning the camera up and down. Same goes for if you want to move the camera kind of like left and right like this. You want to grab by this circle, the Y one, and kind of start panning like that. Now, of course, just like all the other transform functions, you can also always rotate by the values in the numbers here, which are just a function of 360 degrees. So right now, I just make this, you can make the Y, 180 degrees and you'll turn the camera around, basically. Make it 90 degrees, you'll turn it like, 90 degrees. So this is kind of like how rotations work. Just remember that I recommend, you always rotate by the individual lines because you have no control when you rotate by the middle. So yeah, that's just kind of like the basic movement, just kind of navigating around Unity, importing some basic assets, and just kind of being a little comfortable with the 3D scene. Now, what if we want to add some interactions or something happening in here? Currently, kind of have a static scene, and I can demonstrate this by grabbing this sphere and use the move tool and just pull the sphere up into the sky a little bit, just like that. Just make it kind of hover just a little bit over the ground. So if you press play with the sphere hovering over the ground like that, you'll see that nothing happens. It just hovers over the ground. Now the reason is because we haven't told the sphere what to do. It doesn't, it's just doing what it's meant to do right now, which is nothing. So an easy way to just add some interactions, or more so like some actions, is to add physics to the sphere, which is, there's a really great built-in engine into Unity of physics. Like, you can do all sorts of cool physics simulations. So to add physics to the sphere, we are going to add it as a component. So remember how earlier I was saying, everything in Unity is based on components. Every object has components. So right now our sphere has something called a sphere collider, a mesh renderer, and it's this material which is part of the mesh renderer. What I actually want to do is go over here to component, and right before you do that, you can actually close excuse me, you can actually close this mesh renderer, and you can close this material. Just kind of, we're not really going to be tweaking that right now. And because I really want you to see how this component pops in. So if you go over to component up here, right next to game object, you'll see there's a lot of different components here that you can use. We specifically want to go for physics, and then the component we want is called rigid body. See that? So if you click rigid body, now you should see your sphere just attained a rigid body component here on the right. Has some values like mass, drag, angular drag, does it use gravity, and etc. So that's all you need to give it the physics. So you can actually go ahead and press play, and you should see just a very boring action of it just falling down. So, like that. Not very exciting, just kind of fell down. Now, if we want to have a little bit of fun with this, what you can actually do is kind of copy and paste some of these. So you can actually take the sphere that you made, and you can do Command C, Command V, and you won't see it because it's actually duplicated right on top of it, but you can see it here in the hierarchy. Now you have sphere and sphere 1. So the second sphere that you pasted in, you can actually pull it out like that. So another way of duplicating is, instead of doing Command C, Command V, you could just do Command D for duplicate. And same thing, it won't show up because it's inside the sphere. You literally duplicate them right on top of each other, so you can pull it out. Yeah, exactly. That's what happens when you press play. So yeah, just make sure you unpress play when you're like making changes to the scene, because any change you make in the scene while in play mode get like reverted back to before you press play. So yeah. So the reason why that is because a lot of things in Unity, when you're going to be working like in the play mode, you're going to be generating objects, behaviors, a lot of things are going to change, and basically the program just resets itself once it's kind of back to its original unplayed mode. But yeah, if you kind of like set up the spheres a little bit like this, maybe if you move them a little bit kind of like off center like that, if you press play, you should see that they just kind of fall on top of each other and just kind of like roll around. Physics. Now, my computer is being a tiny bit laggy mostly because of the screen recording stuff. And just so you know, that's probably what yours is too. And if you didn't have the screen recording on, it probably would run much smoother. So something that I have a lot of fun doing is in play mode, while these spheres are kind of rolling, you can actually select one of them and just kind of Command D like a bunch like this. But it's going to be pretty laggy because the screen recording.
So I just applied rigid body to them, and why aren't you rolling?
Let me see. Oh yeah, yeah, because they're perfectly stacked.
Oh, I moved one to the side.
Yeah, so maybe just move that one on the bottom. Just kind of move it just slightly off center. So that might be like, so if you kind of look from the side, you should maybe move it like completely under it. But let's see.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if it's being like really laggy, because I realize it probably is for both of you, um, you could probably go ahead and like turn off your screen recording and pause it, just so you have a little bit of a smoother experience. I think it should be enough to just get my screen recording for now. Just if you want, I would recommend it if you don't want your computer to heat up a lot, and like you'll see that the physics and stuff will run really smooth once you turn off the screen recording, because it's using up a lot of CPU to screen record. Um, I'm probably gonna look into the future also getting one of those like direct cable screen recorders so that my computer doesn't hollow up at it. I usually use like a PC, but today I came in with the Mac because we're doing ARKit and stuff, and my PC just doesn't use the CPU to screen record. It just like does it like a dream. But the Macs seem to still be doing it all CPU based. But yeah, if you turn off your screen recorder, you'll see that everything will just pop, like be very smooth and nice and useful. So that's kind of like a little bit of basic right here. Now, just a few more kind of items. Um, you go into game object, 3D object, and like cube. You can create a cube. I'm gonna kind of go online and just pull up like a brick texture. Doing this. It's really big. But you could bring like a stone wall or something like that. And I'm just gonna do it the quick way by just dragging our brick texture onto the cube. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna scale my cube and kind of make it into a wall type thing. Just like that. Now, just as a little exercise, I want you to kind of take this and make a nice kind of enclosure around these spheres. So you should have everything you need to kind of like make a cube, scale it around, put a texture on it like a brick wall or something like that, and kind of duplicate around some walls, kind of just make a nice enclosure. Rotate it. Make sure you're rotating by the horizontal line. If you ever kind of mess up the rotation or something like that, you can always undo, or you can just modify the rotation values, like the direct numbers. So now you should kind of start getting a sense of just how easy this stuff is, like to kind of work with Unity. It's very fun. It's almost like playing a game. You know, you're kind of putting stuff together. Um, I know, like when you first start Unity and stuff, it's kind of intimidating to just turn on the program and see this just empty, nothing. And like, where do I click? What do I do? But once you kind of get the hang of some of these basics, you'll start to feel a lot more confident in this stuff and kind of get how it all works. Um, I just kind of made it look like this. Um, you can just have a little bit of fun with it. And then the other thing that I kind of like to do as like an exercise is just take some of these and make almost like a little, I wouldn't call it like a Rube Goldberg machine, but just make like a fun kind of slide for these balls, just by kind of making a very interesting way for them to kind of slide down. Just gonna make something like this. You can make it any way you want. I'll do one like this. I'll do another one like this. Something like that. And this should kind of just use the physics and just it should slide down. Yep. There we go. Oh, see, I messed up. So
Slight pitch to it.
yeah, so I should turn this like a little bit like that. You can save, just in case. Go. Yeah, just like a little fun. So yeah, go ahead and play with that for a few minutes, and then I'd say we kind of call this intro to Unity. Pretty much like complete. We can cover some more interesting stuff too. Like I'm sure we'll have a little bit of leftover time after we configure all the stuff. Once you're kind of nice and comfortable with this stuff, just kind of like moving objects around. The other important thing is to really get used to using the camera. So I really want you to practice panning around like this. So once you can do this, once you're comfortable doing this, kind of just going around in a circle around your scene, seeing it from every angle. It's very important to look at it from every angle because you don't know where you're moving things until you kind of check from the sides. So again, the best way that I recommend is you strafe, so you hold like an A or a D key, and you just kind of rotate into it as you're kind of you turn into it as you're kind of moving sideways. And that's kind of the best way to rotate around something.
Still working on that.
It's a little
awkward.
tricky. Just try it like this, right? So just hold right click, go a little bit left, turn a little bit right. Go a little bit left, turn a little bit right. A little bit left, turn a little right. And the same thing, if you go right, turn a little bit left. Go right, turn left. Go right, turn left. And then you can see that you're kind of going around the scene. So,
I'm going far back.
so even you can turn even more. So don't hold, like just kind of like hold a little bit. Let's see, I'll show you. Let me bring it right back here. So go a little bit, turn. Go a little bit, turn. And then you'll always kind of stay centered. If you kind of go too much and you turn a little, and you go too much and you turn a little.
I overshoot, right?
Exactly. So just go a little bit, turn. A little bit, back, turn. Like that. And we got the same MacBook. The darker one. I just have the case on it.
Oh,
Mine
I
looks
see.
a little bit bigger. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the same one.
Is it enough in terms of performance?
Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, I have like my gaming computer for like the VR stuff and the hardcore stuff.
Right.
But like just for everyday use, for programming, for Unity, for AR, it's perfect.
Cool. Wow.
So I just noticed sometimes this happens. By accident, you might have clicked this right here. You can't kind of see it, but see that it's something called isometric view, which is actually like a more like an architectural view. There's no depth. Everything is like the same depth. You want to click this little letters right here to go back to perspective view. So, yeah, I just noticed that. Yeah, so that might have been why your scene was looking a little bit weird. But yeah, if you ever see something weird like that, or if it doesn't look like what it's like on my screen, you could totally go ahead and tell me. So you should definitely be able to see it now more. Yeah, it's very hard to work in an isometric view. That's like for very specialized purposes. So yeah, just remember if your scene ever kind of looks very funky and you can't really zoom in, because you can't zoom in isometric view. That probably means you're in isometric. So you have to click right here under these gizmos to bring yourself back to perspective.
On OBS, if I hit stop recording,
It'll save the recording.
but there's no pause.
There is no pause recording. Yeah, go for it. We can take a little break, stop my recording as well, and I'll just start it right back up after.